Yo, what's happening, guys? It's GM Cody, and welcome back to another episode. And today we are talking about one of my favorite role playing games of all time, actually, even though I don't talk about it very often. I should preface that. I should change that a little bit. Maybe not one of my favorite role playing games of all time, but definitely one of my favorite role playing settings of all time. And if you couldn't tell by the picture behind me, because we swapped out prints there, we are talking about Shadowrun. Specifically, we're talking about my favorite version of this game, which is Shadowrun Second Edition, that came out in the early 90s, 1992, I think, to be specific. Now, I have a long time love-hate/hate relationship with Shadowrun, and we're going to get into the details tonight. And basically, what we're going to do is we're going to look at Shadowrun Second Edition like we always do, pretty in depth. Right, we're going to go through the rule book. We're going to talk a little bit about the lore. We're going to talk a little bit about the art. We're going to talk a little bit about the rules and my general impressions and experiences with the game, as usual. So, to start off with, for the uninitiated, which I don't think there'll be many of you out there, I think most people that'll be watching this video already know a lot about Shadowrun or know just enough to be dangerous, right? But I will give a brief synopsis if you've never been introduced to the very interesting world of Shadowrun. And I think the best way to do that is to read the introduction from the book itself, because I think it gives a very good impression of what this game is all about. The year is 2053. Watch your back, shoot straight, conserve ammo, and never ever cut a deal with a dragon. Very popular street proverb. The world is changed, some say awakened. A lull in the flow of magical energies subsided, and magic returned to the world. Elves, dwarves, orcs, trolls assumed their true form, throwing off their human guise. Creatures of the wild changed too, becoming things of myth and legend. Modern society fights on despite the odds, in an effort to assimilate the ways of magic into a technological world. The decades that followed the awakening were years of turmoil, panic, and chaos, as the four horsemen of the apocalypse seemed to race towards the earth. Primitive cultures that had never lost touch with their mystical past began to use magic against the great nations that had suppressed them for so long. The vast global telecommunications network collapsed under an assault by a mysterious computer virus. Nuclear missiles were launched, but failed to detonate. Dragons soared into the skies. Epidemics and famine ravaged the world's populations. Clashes between newly awakened races and the rest of humanity became common. All central authority crumbled, and the world began to spiral down into a black abyss. But man and his kin are hardy animals. One out of the devastation and anarchy, order slowly reemerged. Cyber technology eradicated the last vestiges of computer viruses and replaced the old telecommunications network with what became known as the Matrix. New nation-states of Meridians, elves, orcs, and dwarves were formed. I'm sorry, American Indians is Amerindians is what it says in here. Native Americans. Metroplexes, vast city-states sprawled over the landscape. Central governments were replaced by megacorporations that had become a law unto themselves. People who accepted their sovereignty were protected. The outcast, descendants, and rebels were exploited and abused, continuing a condition that has existed between the weak and powerful since time began. Technology, too, has changed people. No longer only flesh, many have turned to the artificial enhancements of cyberware to make themselves more than human. Stronger, smarter, faster is the human of today. In the world of 2053, the metroplexes are monsters casting long shadows, and it's in the cracks between the giant corporate structures that Shadowrunners find their homes. When the megacorps want a job done, but they don't want to get their hands dirty, it's a Shadowrun they need, and they turn to the runners, who are the only ones that can do it. Though a Shadowrunner's existence is not listed in any government or corporate database, the demand for his or her services is high. She might be a Decker, sliding like a whisper through the visualized databases of giant corporations, spiriting away the only thing of real value, information. Or perhaps he is a street samurai and a forcer for hire whose combat skills and reflexes make him the ultimate urban predator. or perhaps he or she is a magician, possessing an ancient gift, the ability to wield and shape the magical energies that now surround the earth. And that's exactly the kind of firepower you'll need if you get hired to make a Shadowrun. So, I know that was a little bit long-winded, but I think that perfectly sums up what this game is all about, right? It is a combination of cyberpunk and D&D fantasy, right, to some extent. It has all the great cyberpunk tropes and all the great fantasy tropes and horror stuff and all that kind of vibe. Noir, like film noir and all that kind of thrown into this one world and done very well, right? It's not... mishmashes like this can sometimes be pretty chaotic, but Shadowrun is not. It does it really well. And this is something that FOSSA was known for, the game company that, published Shadowrun back in the day. They also published, Battletech and Earth Dawn and even Star Trek and the like back in the day. They were very good. FOSSA was very, very good, one of the best at crafting universes and worlds and lore, really deep and intricate lore and stories that really grabbed you, right? Like, that's one reason people love these games that FOSSA made, is because they were just so well imagined. The rules might not be the greatest, and we'll talk about that in a little while, but it was the world itself that really grabbed you and wanted, really, made you want to play these games. And that's what made me excited about Shadowrun when I was a kid, when I first saw it. And all the other FOSSA games, too. I'm a big lover of Battletech and Earth Dawn and all that. But Shadowrun was probably my favorite out of all those. So, tonight we're going to be talking about Shadowrun 2nd Edition. Now, my background with Shadowrun, you know me, I like to kind of talk about where I come from when I'm talking about a game. I got into Shadowrun, or I should say I first heard about Shadowrun right around the time I first got into gaming, when I was about 9 or 10, right? And I can't remember exactly where I first was exposed to it, but I think what it was I had received the Battletech box set for Christmas that year. That year that I got into gaming, for that Christmas, I got the Battletech box set for my grandmother. And it had a catalog in there. It had a FOSSA catalog. And one of the things it was advertising was Shadowrun. And this looked fucking hell of awesome in there, right? And it just instantly drew me in with all the really awesome artwork. This period of artwork really, really, I just love it. I just love this time in role-playing games was my favorite time for art, especially, and a lot of the creativity that was coming out of it as well. There was a lot of interesting, creative, new ideas coming out at that time. And the games themselves were really cool and just dripping with flavor. And, so anyway, Shadowrun grabbed me for all those reasons. Just from the art in the catalog, I wanted to know more about this game. Now, eventually, me and one of my friends, Andrew, who I've talked about before on the channel, he was, the guy that got me into gaming initially. He kind of, lit the match under it, if you will. And he was interested in Shadowrun as well. So we eventually got a hold of a copy of Shadowrun. Now, I don't remember what version we originally played, but I think it was this. And I didn't know there was a different, I didn't know there were all these different editions and stuff, but this is the one I got. And this is the first edition of Shadowrun that came out in 1989, and this is well before, I got into gaming. But I picked this up because I got it secondhand at the bookstore for probably a few bucks. And I do remember buying this, but I don't exactly remember when. So I think this was the version me and Andrew played originally, or tried to play at least. This is the version we tried to play back then. The other thing that's, a year or two later that really got me going about Shadowrun was they made a video game. They made two video games. They made one for Super Nintendo, and they made another one for Sega Genesis. Now, I don't have either one of them in my collection anymore, but I used to have the Sega Genesis version, and I still think that's a fantastic game. I love that game. the music and the design and everything. It has its flaws, and maybe I'll stream that game sometime on the channel, because that game did have a big impact on me as far as not just video games, but it also spurred my love for Shadowrun even more, because I could play Shadowrun on my Sega Genesis, and it was very true to the tabletop role-playing game, or as true as it could be for being a Sega Genesis game. It was very true to the setting of Shadowrun. It's something I still respect that game for to this day, within the limitations of the Sega Genesis. I think they did a really good job. The Super Nintendo game's pretty cool too. It's a very different kind of game, but they did a pretty good job with that one. But the Sega game, that's where it's at. But that really inspired me even more playing that game. And of course, all the other cyberpunk influences growing up, like Blade Runner and all that stuff. I was already, a big fan of that stuff, so I immediately fell in love with Shadowrun. So, so we started playing Shadowrun, just me and him, like solo by ourselves. And over the years, from the end of elementary school all the way up until, all through middle school, when me and him would get together, that was a very common thing I remember for me and him to do, was to play Shadowrun. Now, we also played the 3rd edition of Shadowrun, because that came out not too long afterwards. But I don't think we actually played the 2nd edition, even though we thought we were. I think we were playing this version, actually. So me and him played Shadowrun a lot, and we did, I had another gaming group, but they weren't really interested in playing Shadowrun. So I never got to play Shadowrun with a big group back then. I did get to play in high school, and we played it a little bit. We didn't play it a whole lot. It wasn't something everybody was really, again, the guys just were not that into it as I was, but we did play it sporadically here and there. And then after high school, we played it quite a bit more, because I actually started running more games during that time. So I would run Shadowrun every so often. And sadly, Shadowrun is one of my favorite games, but it's one of those games I never, as you can tell from my conversation here, I didn't get to play a whole lot of throughout the years, and still haven't. I've played it here and there for the past, almost 30 years now, but I never got to play like a really long, strung out Shadowrun campaign. Now, hopefully that's going to change, because my friend Chase is talking about running a Shadowrun game. I get to play in it. And finally, we get back to some face-to-face gaming, and I'm excited about that. And he's going to run Shadowrun 2nd edition. So I'm pretty stoked about that. And actually, that's kind of what inspired me to want to do this video and talk about, finally get to talking about some Shadowrun. So tonight we're just going to look at the core rulebook and go through it. This is probably going to be multiple parts, because this is a pretty hefty book. This book is 283 pages or so. So it's a fairly hefty rule book, so I think it might be split up into 2 parts. It just depends on time. And like I said, we're just going to do like a general overview of everything. I'm not going to get too deep into the lore or the rules or anything else. Just like I usually do. If you've ever watched my videos, you know how I do these things. I do dive into things, but I'm not going to read you we're not going to go page by page and read every single thing. I'm just going to give you a general overview of this. But in the future, if you guys like the video, let me know. And if you want to see more Shadowrun videos, let me know, even though it doesn't really matter. I'm probably going to do them anyways. And we can look at some of the source books and go into depth about like some Shadowrun lore, and talk about in depth, about how to play the game, or whatever I'm interested in, talking about. So let me know if there's something Shadowrun related you want to see some more, and let's dive into it, shall we? Without any further ado. So here we go, Shadowrun 2nd edition. Of course, this one of my favorite pieces here, the Larry Elmore cover here, which is the signed print I have behind me that I got personally from Larry, and very cool piece. I really love this piece. Larry did tell me something interesting about this. He apparently is not very, it's not one of his favorite pieces, funny enough. And he rarely gets any comments about it, but I think it's a fantastic piece. But he told me something about it, is that thing he wasn't happy about was the background, because it was a rush job, apparently. I can't remember if he said, and he can correct me if, you know, whatever. I can't remember if he said that somebody else was going to do this cover, and then they didn't come through with it, so he had to fulfill, they asked him to fulfill the cover, but they needed it like really quick, you know, like in a couple weeks or something. And so he didn't really have the time to do as much detail as he would have liked, and he wanted to do a lot more with the background here, and just was not able to do so. And I guess it kind of shows. I really never paid much attention to the background. I think it works just fine. My attention was always drawn to the foreground here, and all the little details in the foreground, from the graffiti on the cyber terminal here, and the characters here. I've always loved these characters, and especially this, you know, this mage girl is just really awesome, and, you know, she is just archetypical Shadowrun in my book. You know, she's got everything. But, you know, even from like, you know, the sewer grate and the stuff pouring, you know, the steam pouring out of the sewer grate, and the bullets ricocheting off the ground from these, whatever they are, you know, shooting at these runners, and you can just feel the dampness and the, you know, the grittiness of this, what's going on here with all this rubble and stuff on the ground, like all these little pieces of rubble and everything, and little puddles. It just really, the foreground of this picture is awesome to me, and that's really all I've ever noticed. But anyways, I'm not going to go on and on. And, you know, the art of Shadowrun is something I admire quite often. If you guys know me, you know that I talk quite a bit about art, because I love it so much, especially in these role-playing games. So we will definitely be stopping and admiring the art as we go. And this piece is really cool. And there's a lot of great artists in here. Jeff Lobenstein, Joel Bisk, Jim Nelson, Dana Knutson, Janet Aluzio, Tim Bradstreet is in here, Mike Nilsson, Earl Gear, Dan Smith, Steve Venters, and Dwayne Luce. So there's a lot of really good artists in here. So anyways, here's the introduction. Welcome to the Shadows. The year is 2053, which is the introduction I read to you guys. Here's a very cool Tim Bradstreet piece, which, if you watched my Vampire the Masquerade video, I went on and on about how much I like Tim Bradstreet's stuff, and this is no exception. This is awesome and very Shadowrun. You know, they're going through kind of the world, the Shadowrun. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into the lore of Shadowrun. I think the introduction I read you guys pretty much sums it up. And we can do, you know, in the future, maybe I'll do a whole video about, you know, the whole timeline of what led up to the world of Shadowrun, because it's very interesting, and go into the lore. And I love these old books because they always started off with like a story, and this story's pretty cool, and the art's very cool and everything. So we're going to skip past that, and then we get into the background here. This is a piece by Janet Aluzio, and this is really cool. And talking about what led up to the world of Shadowrun. It's all very interesting stuff, but we're gonna skim past it because it's quite a bit to digest, and I don't want to take up too much time talking about that. I think that would, again, require a whole separate video. Game concept. So if you've never played Shadowrun before, it is a dice pool system. You roll a certain amount of dice, and you are looking for successes, essentially. If you roll a 1, of course, it's the rule of 1 is a roll of 1 is always a failure. Roll 6 is always a success. Well, it's not always a success. What it is if you roll all 1s and no successes, it's a critical failure and something bad happens. If you roll a 6, you get to roll another dice and add it to that 6. The one thing you have to do is you have to beat a success number, which can go, it can vary in numbers pretty wildly, and we'll look at that in a little bit here. So you'll have success ratings, difficulty ratings, I should say, that are higher than 6. So in order to get that, you have to roll 6, and you have to roll another dice. Give me just a minute. I'm going to pause the video. Oh, sorry. I got bad sneezing attack there. Allergies have been awful. So that's yeah. So rule of one is if you roll all ones, get no successes, it's bad things happen. If you roll a 6, you get to roll a die again and add that to your 6. And I think that's cumulative. So if you roll another 6, I think you get to roll it again, I believe. Yeah, that's how it works. So you can get that multiple times. You also have dice pools that can help out during combat and test. You have a combat pool, a magic pool, a control pool, and a hacking pool, which is made up of your attributes, which we'll look at later. But you can draw from that pool to take actions during combat situations or during a stressful situation, and modify your dice. Of course, add that to your dice pool. And dice pools are made up of your attributes. Usually your attributes or a skill, and it'll tell you how many dice you roll. And typically that ranges from 1 to 6, but that can be higher or whatever due to your race, or you have cyberware or bioware, or from magic. It can be modified from all those things, or your dice pool. So the first thing you look into is metahumanity, which is the metahumans, the different other races. Now, metahumans in Shadowrun did not originally, start as metahumans. So further back in history, I think probably, I can't remember off the top of my head what it is, 20 or 30 years before, humans started to change. And not just change, people started giving birth to metahumans, and you had dwarves and elves first, and then there was a period called the goblinization, where people started to actually physically change or be born as orcs and trolls. And this is known, also it should be noted that Shadowrun is known as the 6th world. Our modern world is known as the 5th world. And this kind of ties also directly into the other FOSSA game, Earth Dawn, which is based in the 4th world. So in this world, during the Awakening, magic and the metahuman races and the mystical races have come back into the Earth and crept back into the Earth. But originally, it's not like dwarves have always been around or elves have always been around. They did disappear for a while, and now they're back. And it's, you do have the potential that your character might have started off as a human and became a metahuman. So that's something to note. And that's why they're called metahumans. So you have dwarves, you have elves, and I love this art, right? This is all by Nelson. You have humans, of course, orcs, and trolls. And that's all the different racial types you can pick in Shadowrun. And then we're going to get into creating a character. So creating a character, the first thing you have to do is you have to pick, so you have race, magic, attributes, skills, and resources. And then you have to pick a priority for each of those categories, right? And then that'll determine what you can get depending on, priority. So it goes from A, the best, and E, the worst, and you have to pick a priority for each of those. I love this character creation system. I know some people don't, but I've always been a big fan of this. I think it's different, and it's also you can be really good at one thing but really bad at something else, and I like that. You have a lot of strengths and things and a lot of weaknesses in some things. I think it's a pretty good balance and everything. It's just a really interesting way to make a character. If you're going to be a metahuman, your priority has to be A for your race. Unless you're going to be a magician, a metahuman magician, then it can be B. If you're going to be a human magician, it has to be A. And if you want to be a metahuman adept, which is not a magician, but it's somebody that uses magic to enhance their body and basically become like a real life action hero. It's basically you become like one of the characters from the Matrix, essentially, but different Matrix, not the Shadowrun Matrix. We'll talk about that a little later. You have to priority is C. So right off the bat, attributes, you get a certain number of points to spend on your attributes. I think it's a 1-to-1 if I remember correctly off the top of my head. And skills, same thing. And then resources, how much money you start with. And you also start off with a certain number of magical resources, which I can't remember what they... force points, which you can spend on spells and fetishes and totems and that sort of stuff. Foci and stuff. Just magic related. And then you don't get to keep all these resources. You have to divide it by a certain amount, which is... where is it? Anyways, I can't find it offhand here, but you don't start with the full amount. Whatever you didn't spend, you have to divide it by a certain amount, and that's how much pocket money you actually have. And so, yeah, you want to spend as much of your resources up front as you can. So that's how you create a character, essentially. Now, metahumans, of course, do get bonuses to their attributes, and they get some other stuff like resistances or thermographic vision or low light vision, or, you know, like in the case of the troll, they actually get dermal armor. They have natural body armor. And maybe some, like the troll gets reach for armed and unarmed combat, which is cool. So, you know, metahumans do get some bonuses, and that's why they have to pick a higher priority at character creation to be a metahuman. Now, metahumans can also have, there's some options for metahumans. And there's some options here, like you can give metahumans don't have to have as high of a priority. And the other reason they give is that they're so high is that metahumans are a minority. All right, and in Shadowrun, the metahumans, like, racism has kind of gone away, like as far as the color of your skin. But the new racism in the year 2053 in the Shadowrun world is against metahumanity. So there's a lot of racism against metahumanity. So that's something to bring up. Just a little bit of tidbit of lore there. But they are the minority per the game, but you can make it where they're not so much, and it's a lot easier to be a metahuman, and you can decrease the priority of being a metahuman. Metahumans can also have allergies. If they get an allergy, they get some bonus points, either in attributes or skills, force, or money. And you get to pick what kind of allergy they have and the severity of the allergy. So that's pretty interesting and very, very much ties into the whole, like, old folklore where, you know, like fairies were allergic to iron and stuff like that. But you can be allergic to a whole host of things. And then they go, that's basically how you create a character. So you use your points to buy attributes, skills, and buy gear and get magic spells and all that stuff. And then they give you this 20 questions, which I think is really great and something that I don't think a lot of role-playing games do as detailed anymore, but back in the day they did. And they go through this whole thing to really flesh out your character, which is something I really appreciate. You know, basic stuff like what is your character's sex and physical size, description, hair size, general appearance, where was your character born, what's his age, what was the character's family, has the character begun his own family, is the character educated, has the character ever done anything else for a living, what about the character's political and religious beliefs, character's moral code, goals, why does the character run the shadows, what is the character's personality, and just on and on and on. Love, hate, name. So, yeah, I think these 20 questions are really good for a lot of role-playing games, actually. And then we get into the archetypes, which I think is a really cool thing and something I think is still around in Shadowrun today. And what the archetypes are is kind of give you a general idea of what characters look like in Shadowrun, but also you can take these archetypes and play them straight out of the book and have a ready-made character, essentially. You'd still have to... you still have to do a few little things. I don't think there's much really that you have to do, but pretty much it's all there for you, laid out and ready to go. And you've got all these really cool archetypes that you could use, not just for characters, but they're really useful for NPCs too, and I've used them all the time for NPCs. But for new players, this can be really great if they're a little bit intimidated by the whole world and what to play. They can look through the archetypes and get an idea and modify one of these, which is possible too, or they can just play one straight out of the book and they work just fine as is. So you got the bodyguard, combat mage, the Decker, which are the hackers of the Matrix, the detective, which I love this dude's like rainbow tie. It's really awesome. The dwarf mercenary, which, you know, I love all these pictures. I think all these are by Nielsen too. The elven Decker, which I love this. This is very just 1980s Shadowrun. This is something I wanted to bring up about Shadowrun too. And it's something I wanted to bring up at the beginning and forgot about is Shadowrun throughout the years. Shadowrun's still around today. You know, I have other versions of Shadowrun. I have the 4th edition. I have the 5th edition. I've looked through the 6th edition. But one thing I don't like about Shadowrun today is I think one of the reasons, one thing that made Shadowrun so cool to me is the vision of the future through the eyes of the 1980s, right? And I think that's one thing that makes Shadowrun still cool to me today, and one reason I love the aesthetics of the old Shadowrun is I like that retro-futurism of Shadowrun. I think that's where Shadowrun is really the sweet spot for me, is in the retro-futurism eyes. And when you try to advance Shadowrun like they've done nowadays, it really loses a lot of the cool flavor, in my opinion. Like, if that's your jam, have at it. But in my opinion, I like that retro-futurism look. Like this Elven Decker, and it looks like he has like a Commodore 64, and he's got like the 80s like glam hair. It looks like an 80s glam rocker with some feathers on him and shit. Like, this is totally like what I like about Shadowrun, right? Like, this is cool. Compared to, you know, modern Shadowrun, which let me see if I can just look at some of the, like, you know, this is cool and all, right? Like, this look, well, hold on. Let me make the thing bigger so you guys can actually see what the hell I'm talking about. You know, so this is cool and all, right? Like, this is, I guess, I don't really give two shits about this art, but like, it's good art and everything. Like, this is cool and all, but like, this isn't Shadowrun. That's not Shadowrun to me. Like, Shadowrun has that vision of the future through the eyes of the 1980s, and to me, that's Shadowrun. That's what makes Shadowrun cool to me. And there's a lot of other games that have that quality as well, which we'll look at in the future. But that's something I'm kind of rambling there, but I did want to bring that up because to me, that's a very important aspect of Shadowrun, and one of the reasons I love it. And that's one of the reasons I do not love modern Shadowrun, is because it does not have that quality. So anyways, moving on. Looking through the archetypes, you also have the former company man. This guy's awesome. Former wage mage, you know, a mage that worked for, you know, the corporations. A gang member, and this ganger's awesome. He always reminded me of the bass player from the Jefferson Airplane. That's what he looks like. This mercenary, very cool. The rigger, which is basically the wheel man, essentially. More or less. The shaman, which is one of the two traditions you can choose to be. Use magic. You can either be a shaman, or you can be a hermetic mage, or an adept. Street mage. Street samurai, the augmented cyberware warriors of the future, right? Street shaman, which is cool. Tribesman, which is really cool. And that's all the archetypes in the 2nd edition book. But a really good selection of stuff you can choose from, or even just get ideas. And again, the art is very inspiring to me, at least. Here's another cool piece of art. And skills. So skills do not add to attributes when you take a skill test, which is very different from a lot of these dice pool systems. The way this actually works is when you take a skill test, whatever your skill rating is, you check to see if you had that skill. Now, you don't have that skill, you go down the skill web. So, for an example, and every time you go down, you click you hit one of these circles, your target number goes up by 2. So, for example, say you wanted to do physical sciences, but you don't have physical sciences. You only have your intelligence, and say your intelligence is 6 or whatever. And the target rating is whatever, it's 6. Okay, target rating 6. I don't have physical sciences, but I have intelligence. Okay, so now it's going to be you're going to start at physical sciences and go to the right here. Now it's going to be 8, 10. You're going to go this way. 11, 12. And that'll be your new target number. So that's the way it works. So you could still use a lot of skills without being trained in them. Now, physical sciences you actually cannot. I should take that back, but I don't believe. Certain skills you cannot, but a lot of skills you can. You can use a lot of skills without another skill. You can also use certain skills that are related. So if you have another science skill or whatever, you might, the game master might allow you to make a skill test based on that skill, and you do the same thing. You go down the web, and your target number goes up. But what really differs from this game and a lot of games is you do not add your dice pools together. You do not add your skill pool and your attribute pool together. You're either doing one or the other, which is an interesting idea and works really well in theory. And yeah, it works fine, right? It works just fine. And you have a pretty good host of skills. Not not overwhelming amount, but enough to get the job done, right? You've got everything you're probably going to need here for a game of Shadowrun. The next thing you have in skills is you have concentrations and specializations. So what you can do is during character creation or later, I think you can do it later on too, like don't quote me on that. You can take a concentration or a specialization. So if you concentrate in a skill, you have to pick a specific category within that skill. So an example would be armed combat. You could pick edged weapons or clubs or pole arms or whatever, a broad specific category within that category, and you get +1 to your base skill rating, but you get so if you took, for example, firearms, and you wanted your concentration to be submachine guns, and you had a firearms of 4, or sorry, a firearms of 5. I'm actually using the example in the book here. And you took a concentration at SMG. Well, now your SMG rating when you use submachine guns is a 6, but your firearms rating overall goes down by 1 and is now a 4. So that's how concentration works. Specialization is a different thing. You pick a very specific thing out of there. So for example, if you took Uzi out of submachine gun, that would be your specialization. And with the specialization, you add 2 to your specialization, but subtract 2 from your overall broad skill. So that's how those work. And very cool. And it gives examples here of concentrations within all the skills. Different languages, all the different languages you can take is because of language skills. And here is all the skills and their concentrations laid out in a big master listing here. Combat. Let's see how we're doing on time. So we're 38 minutes in. Okay, we'll talk about combat a little bit. We're gonna start talking about combat, and then I'm probably gonna end the video. So, combat. The way combat works, and to be real here, so we're about to get into combat, magic, vehicle driving, and using the Matrix. All these use very similar concepts. So once you learn one of these concepts, it pretty much applies to everything else. And that is one criticism Shadowrun has, is that there are separate systems for everything you do. A lot of things you do in Shadowrun, like all these things are separated. But to be honest, they're all pretty similar. There are some differences between each one, but you can see very strong similarities. So I don't think that's a strong criticism. Now, one criticism I will state that I don't think I stated at the beginning is Shadowrun is a tad crunchy. It is I wouldn't say crunchy. I would just say it's a little bit on the complex side. There's a number of steps that you have to do and memorize, and it can be a little daunting when you first play Shadowrun. We're speaking about Shadowrun Second Edition. I cannot really speak for the modern iteration of Shadowrun, how that works. I've played it a little bit, and I know it works fairly similarly, but different too. But in the classic Shadowrun, it can be a little daunting at first to learn all the steps that you need to do in combat, in matrix running, and all that stuff. But once you do it a few times, do it enough, and memorize it enough, it works out just fine. Now, that's not to say I'm not critical of it, because I have been. In my opinion, is it could be streamlined and made a lot easier, made a lot better. Not what they've done today. I think it could be done better, but I don't think it's bad, right? Like, I don't think it's the worst thing ever made or anything. Like, I've seen far worse rule sets, but it's one thing that, every time I step away from Shadowrun for a while and come back into Shadowrun, it's one thing I do notice. It takes me a while for that to click in my brain, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with a little bit more complexity in my role-playing games. I think, I've played tons of complex role-playing games, so there's nothing wrong with that. But it is a criticism I have about Shadowrun, is that it is a tad not crunchy, but a little bit on the complex side. And, there's a lot of subsystems for a lot of things that I think could be rolled into one. But at the same time, I kind of like all the subsystems, because it really adds some depth and character and flavor to the game. The fact that there are all these little tiny subsystems within the game. And to be honest, most time when I'm playing it, a lot of them get ignored, but they are cool. They are cool, but they do come with some drawbacks, right? So now that we have that out of the way, we're going to cover the basics of combat. All right? So the basics of combat are this. You roll for initiative, right? So everybody rolls a certain amount of d6, usually 1, but it could be more, depending. And you add your reaction. Then you go down the line in initiative, and characters take actions. Now, you get a certain number of actions per turn, and we'll look in this more depth when we actually get into the combat chapter, but you get a certain amount of actions. Simple and complex actions, but you also get a movement action. You also get a dice pool. Your dice pools refresh at the beginning during this time of the round. And in this case, we were talking about the dice pools. You have the hacking pool, the control pool, which is for driving, hacking, and magic pool. And in this case, if you're in a combat situation, you're going to be using your combat pool. So you can draw dice out of your combat pool to attack or to defend. And it refreshes every round, but you have to be conservative about, do I want to do an all-out attack? Do I want to do an all-out defense? Or do I want to split my dice pool for both, right? So it's a bit of a balancing act, and it's something I really do like. It adds a lot of flavor to all-out aggression, all-out defense, or something in between, or maybe a little bit more in the other. Then you declare actions and do your actions. You resolve your actions, and then you begin a new combat turn. You can get multiple actions. That's possible, and if that's the case, every 10 combat phases, you take your second action, right? You can delay your actions, and we were talking about the different kinds of actions you have. You could take 3 different types of actions: free, simple, and complex. You can take 1 free action and 2 simple actions, or one complex action. And here's a list of all the actions. So free actions, or activate your cyberware, call a shot, change your firing mode on your gun, delay your action, drop prone, drop an object, eject a smart gun clip, gesture, observe, or speak a word. Simple actions are change your gun mode if you don't have a smart gun, change position, command a spirit, fire a weapon, insert a clip, observe in detail, pick up or put down an object, quick draw, ready a weapon, remove your clip, shift perception, take aim, throw a weapon, or use a simple object. And a complex action is an astral projection, casting a spell, a melee or unarmed attack, firing an automatic weapon, fire mounted or vehicle weapon, reload a firearm, summon nature spirit, use complex object, or use a skill. And then movement, you get a free movement, and you can walk or you can run. If you walk during your turn and do an action, that's +1 to your you add +1 to your target modifier. Characters who are running take a +4 target modifier to any test while running. And of course, there is attacks of opportunity, and they call them interception in this. So if you move into somebody's zone of control, they can attempt to intercept you. And we were talking about the dice pools. Here's the combat pool, control pool, hacking pool, and magic pool, and they're made up of your attributes, essentially, or skills, actually, I believe is the way it works. It just depends on the pool. So like your combat pool is made up of your quickness, intelligence, and willpower ratings divided by 2. Your control pool is equal to the number of dice. Where is it? Equal to the character's reaction, modified, and it's modified by whatever vehicle you're controlling. Your hacking pool is equal to your computer skill or software concentration or decking specialization plus the character's reaction. And magic pool is equal to his or her sorcery skill or any concentration or specialization. And shamans also receive conditional bonuses to their magic pool based on the totem they follow, which we'll look at later. The shamans have totems. Critters work just the same as characters, but they also have a threat pool, a threat rating, which they can add to their dice. It basically acts like a combat pool that they can use, and it's up to the GM how you use that. Surprise, the way surprise works, if you're going to be surprised, both parties make a test. I believe it's a reaction test against a target number of 4. If they have delayed actions, such as the people, ambushing somebody or whatever, they get a -2 to their target number. And then you roll, the person with the most successes gets a surprise over the other person, essentially. And that's the very, very, very basics of combat. And we are 47 minutes in. We're almost an hour. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of range combat, I think I'm going to stop there for the night. And we'll do part 2 next time. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this first part of our look at Shadowrun 2nd edition. If you did, make sure you give me a thumbs up. It's much appreciated. I'm trying to build up the channel a little bit, trying to do more stuff for you guys. And, when you guys do a thumbs up, it not only helps the video circulate around, but it just helps me, makes me more excited to do videos when you guys do that. And also, I really like reading the comments. So, leave me a comment as well. Let me know if you want me to do more Shadowrun videos after we get past the 2nd edition core book. In the future, I would love to look at some of the source books and really dive deep into the lore and talking about, really dive deep into all that stuff, because Shadowrun is really, that's my favorite part of Shadowrun, really, is the lore and the world and all that stuff. I would love to pick up some more of those source books. I do have some of them on the shelf, and explore that stuff with you guys. So, without further ado, I hope you guys have enjoyed it, and we'll check it next time. Peace.